Hello humans. I'm gonna start recording all my intros like this.
Hello humans, I come in peace. I just want to bring you Serum 2 tutorials.
So, listen to what I've been cooking up with Serum 2. Sick! That's all with the help of Serum 2 oscillators. And that's what we're learning about today. I'm teaching you everything, literally every single thing you need to know about Serum 2 oscillators. I have deep dived the manual and I'm gonna teach you everything.
Cubic.
So, all right, before this guy yaps any longer for the next, I don't know, what is it, 30 minutes or whatever, I ended up going so in depth on the wavetable oscillators that we didn't end up having enough time to cover all of the other oscillators. So I lied. This video is just about the wavetable oscillator. You're gonna get a lot of good information, so definitely stick with it. It's gonna be worth it. I drop a lot of nuggets of knowledge, little hidden features you probably didn't know about. But yeah, we'll cover the other oscillators in their own separate videos. All right, back to this fucking guy. We're back in Serum 2. I'm excited to get more in depth with y'all today. Starting off, that preset you heard in the intro, just a tiny little sneak peek at one of the packs I've been working on for sonic weaponry for a big Serum 2 release we're doing. So if that's something that interests you, go to our website. We have a bunch of free downloads there and a place where you can put in your email and get notified once we drop future products, like a bunch of really crazy Serum 2 packs. But we're not here for that. We're here to teach you how to make cool sounds in Serum 2 by breaking down every single part of Serum 2. This is all part of a giant series I'm doing on Serum 2, essentially a video manual. I've gone through 350 pages of the manual for Serum 2, and I'm going to be trying to convey all of the important information I've come across for beginners to intermediate to advanced sound designers. You're going to learn everything you need to master this synth. So, starting with the most important part of Serum 2, and I'd say any digital synth, the oscillators. The oscillators are what generate sound. Let's start with the classic, the wavetable oscillator, the foundation of Serum. Serum 1 was one of, if not the first wavetable synthesizer, at least in the form we know it today. Like for instance, Massive had kind of wavetables, but it wasn't displayed or editable in the same way that Serum kind of presented it. And you didn't have the ability to go in and edit your wavetable and create new wavetables and import them in and take like basses and turn them into wavetables, so then you can make a growl using a wavetable, stuff like that. So Serum was revolutionary with his wavetable synthesizers, and they've come back with Serum 2 to one up themselves and take wavetable synthesizers to even the next level. Now it's not an extreme level up, it's still a lot like Serum, but there's a couple cool changes and improvements and innovations that we're going to cover, as well as just breaking down the basics. So first off, in order to understand how the wavetable oscillator works, let's go over what a wavetable is first. So the way wavetables work in Serum, they don't always, but they can consist of up to 256 single cycle waveforms, which basically means we're not going to cover the wavetable editor in this video, but just for demonstration, you can see there's different frames of this wavetable. So if we scroll through the wavetable position, which basically scrolls through the frames of the wavetable, you'll see you get different types of waveforms. So here we have a saw wave. This is a sine wave. This is a triangle wave. This is, I think, a different type of saw or triangle, or maybe it's a mix of both. I actually don't know what this one's called. We have a square wave. It's a different type of square wave, different type of square wave, different type. It's just smaller pulse widths of square waves. Each one has its own sound. That's what a saw sounds like. Sine wave. Sine waves are used a lot for like subs and for like deeper, more wonkier sounds. Triangle wave is just like, it kind of feels like the in-between of a sub and a saw, because a saw is really gritty. Again, I'm actually not familiar with this shape, sorry. I think actually that's new for the default shapes. Then we got Square waves. Square waves are just rich and full of harmonics. Anything that you're trying to make extremely harmonically rich or sound really crunchy or even sort of like retro, like 8-bit feeling, square waves are your go-to. They're also used a lot for things like rhythm, square 4. So anyways, each frame of the wavetable is a different single cycle waveform. So basically in older, less modern synthesizers, you can only work with single cycle waveforms. So like the sub oscillator lets you choose a waveform and you just choose one type. And that's all you get out of it. Like you can't change how the triangle wave or the sine wave behaves. It's like you just get that one frame and that's all you get. So with wavetables, you get a bunch of frames up to 256 inside of one oscillator. So let's say we drag a bass into there. Now this is probably not going to sound very good because I'm not going to go into the wavetable editor and like edit it to make sure that it's perfectly compatible as a wavetable. This is just simply a demonstration. So if we drag in a wavetable, now all of a sudden we get a bunch of frames of the bass that we just dragged in. And if we automate the wavetable position, you can scan through all those frames. So this is the default shape to scan through a wavetable. You want to put it at a bar and you'll get like an accurately timed playthrough of the wavetable. So you can hear the bass that I put in there. We're actually gonna put this at a quarter note to make it play through faster. That's not the best demonstration. Like I said, I would need to go into the wavetable editor and edit a bunch of stuff. But essentially you can take a bass and you can turn the bass into a wavetable. Then you can scan through the wavetable and then use that as a foundation of a sound. Or you can just use the included wavetables that they have in Serum. Or like, let's say you buy a sonic weaponry pack and we have wavetable folders in our packs. You can use wavetables from us or from anywhere on the internet, make your own, etc. So you have an insane amount of flexibility with the Wavetable Oscillator because of how much you can do. You're not limited to just a couple of basic shapes. But we're gonna start out with the basic shapes for two reasons. One, because it's just a default thing everybody has. Well, I guess in Serum 2, it's called the default shapes. By the way, you can right click your oscillator and init module to basically reset your oscillator to default settings. So your oscillators, they all open up with the default shapes, basically a replacement for the basic shapes wavetable in Serum 1. This is an extremely important wavetable because it's all of the basic waveforms that build synthesis. So like I said, you can bring in basses and create your own wavetables, but the foundational wavetables, the most reliable, the ones that are used to make most of the most popular sounds that you've heard out there, it all goes back to the basic shapes: the saw wave, the sine wave, the square wave, the triangle wave, pretty much all of the types of waveforms that are on the sub oscillator. Those are the foundational waveforms, and it's really important to learn and understand the power of those, because when you start out producing, it doesn't really make sense how they're so special. You feel like you're just gonna sound like everyone else using them. You want to sound unique, you want to sound cooler, so you start trying to get all these crazy sounding wavetables. And you can make a lot of really cool stuff with crazy sounding wavetables, but you get a really valuable understanding of sound design and synthesis when you learn to master the default shapes in this case. So as you begin your Serum 2 journey, I definitely highly encourage you to mess around with the default shapes more than the cool sounding wavetables. Like, that stuff is really cool, but it's a little bit of a shortcut. You'll start to realize, like, I've had the pleasure of interacting and befriending a lot of artists that I look up to, and they'll show me how they do their sound design. And I gotta say, like, 80% of big artists are making their sounds just with the default shapes, nothing else. So these are really important. The point is, you can scan through them with the wavetable position. You can do smooth interpolation so that they all kind of morph into each other. So now if we scan through, it's like one cohesive thing, versus if we undo the smooth interpolation, it'll sound like this. So kind of a bit glitchy. If you click on the image of the wavetable, you can see the full wavetable and every frame that's in it. So if we do the smooth interpolation, it'll kind of slide through there like that instead of going from frame to frame. Let's say we load up a wavetable that's already been developed, then you can kind of see the in-betweens, but still like the main 6 frames. but you can see it goes from 1 to 256. So this little number here is telling you the position, which frame you're on, and you can also control the wavetable position there. Now the wavetable position knob is really important because that's how you get a lot of movement out of your sounds. There's a lot of other ways to get movement, like the warp modes down here, which we'll cover soon, but the wavetable position, when it comes to more interesting and specially designed wavetables, like for instance, let's do like a growl or something. So like actually that's a perfect example of like, if you're not using the wavetable position, you get a really cool sound. That's a really cool sound. I can do a lot with that sound and build off of it. But you start controlling the wavetable position, now you get a glitchy bleep bloop. And that's a whole nother direction you could take it. Or you can kind of control the automation, just do a little bit. And you could get creative with the automation and just turn it into its own little glitch. So a lot of cool stuff you can do with the wavetable position. You can also macro it and use it to change like the timbre of a sound. So that's how you get a lot of variation out of your sounds. Wavetable position, hugely important. So I went on a little bit of a tangent there, but here, let's go ahead and start top to bottom with the oscillators. So first off, all the oscillators you can turn on and off like that. You can change the wavetable with that little drop down. You can choose the routing here. I already covered a basic overview of like all of this stuff in my previous video, but just gonna quickly recap some of it. So you can choose the routing, choose which filter, 1, 2, or both, or choose to send it to one of the mixing buses. Here you can select your wavetables. So you have all the OG Serum 1 wavetables as well as the Serum 2 wavetables, which I haven't gotten the chance to go through all of them yet, but there's a lot of really cool stuff in there. You can also just change the wavetables like this. You can drag in wavetables just directly in here, or if you put wavetables in the Serum 2 presets wavetable folder, they will show up here. Let's say we drag in our own wavetable. There's going to be this little icon that pops up on the left. This is kind of a hidden feature. This is honestly not that well known of a feature yet. This is especially if you're someone who makes presets or you want to share presets with your friends. If you click this button, it'll embed the wavetable or sample that you added into the preset, so that when you send the preset to someone else, it'll have this file included in the preset. And you'll see that icon anywhere else that uses samples or things where you can drag in your own sounds. Now next right here, we have the ability to change the octave. So 12 semitones up or down with each octave of the wavetable. So you're essentially changing the pitch. Let me go ahead and initialize this first. And I'm going to change the view. And this can be automated. All of these settings up here can be automated with one of the modulators or the macros. Then you have the ability to do semitones. So instead of just changing it 1 octave at a time, if you just want to put it up to like a perfect fifth, 7 semitones, you can, or put it down. Either way, so you can change semitones. If you want to just more subtly adjust the pitch within 100 cents, which is basically, there's like, think of it kind of like change, you know, you got your penny, then you got a dime, I know there's a nickel too, then you got a quarter, then you got a dollar. It's like the octave is the dollar, the semitone is the quarter, the fine knob is a penny, 1 cent. It's like you can just adjust it a little bit. So I think 100 cents is a full semitone. So you're kind of basically like slightly detuning the synth. And then you have the coarse over here, which is essentially just like free unhinged pitch shifting. So if you were to automate, for instance, the octave, it's gonna kind of shift between each octave. It's not gonna be smooth. It like kind of cuts to each octave. It's the same with the semitones, but both the fine and the coarse pitch here, it's just one fluid versus the octave. So that's something to keep in mind if you want to modulate the pitch of an oscillator in a really smooth way. You can do the coarse pitch, and that's like not really tied to any sort of notational traditional music values. It's just like free reign pitch shifting. So those are the 4 ways to change the pitch. At least they were, because now you have the ability to right click the oscillator, go here into mode. This is another hidden feature not a lot of people know about. You can change it from semitones to the ability to change the harmonic mode. So basically the harmonic mode changes it from semitones to harmonics. So that's a little more of an advanced way of adjusting pitch. It has to do with something called the harmonic series. Now, I'm not an expert on this stuff. I kind of just mess with it until it sounds good. But essentially what it is it's changing the pitch by multiplying the bass frequency of the sound using whole number harmonics. I don't really know what that means. It's just a cool way to change the pitch. Essentially, it generates pitches based on the harmonic series, which apparently is a lot better for creating interesting overtones in things like bells and organs. And basically the way I would say to use it, especially if you're a bass music producer, is to just kind of play around with the harmonic series and create interesting new harmonies between oscillators using the harmonic series instead of the semitones. The next option for the pitch mode is ratio. Now this is especially useful for FM. This is how Operator does FM, FM8 does FM, Citrus and FL Studio does FM, Phase Plant does FM. Basically, it tunes the oscillator based on a ratio of another oscillator. So basically, it's dependent on whatever another oscillator is at, and then it puts this as at a ratio of that other oscillator's, I guess, current frequency or pitch. Like I said, this is meant for creating interesting timbres with FM. You can choose the source up here. So if we want the source to be oscillator B, then when we change the ratio, it is basically creating a ratio based on oscillator B. A couple tips about how to use ratio. If you put it on 2, I believe it's directly an octave higher. And then 4 works good, 5 also works good for creating cool sort of harmony. 7, I think a lot of the prime numbers are really good. So you can use it to create interesting harmonies like that. Like we already have a sound now. And so pretty much the hertz is just it's kind of like the fine knob. So you just get more in-depth control of the pitch. So those are all the pitch modes. Then down here, we have the ability to change the phase of the oscillator. So basically the phase is kind of like a start position on a sampler. It's basically letting you know what part of the waveform it's gonna start at when you click a note. So wherever the line is where it's going to start. A lot of times you won't hear a difference, but certain wavetables and in certain configurations, you'll hear a much more audible difference depending on where the phase is. And then the random phase is basically giving you a range. As you can see, this yellow highlighted area, it's giving you a range of where it's going to move around with each note press. So if we click a note, it's gonna basically, you want to keep the random up if you want there to be subtle variation between every note press. It's kind of a way to create an organic, more human sounding sound where there's subtle changes no matter what note you press, just like if you were playing a real instrument. But for instance, if you're designing basses and you want everything to sound consistent, you want to turn the random phase down, and then you can just choose where to put the phase. Like I said, sometimes it makes a big difference in the sound, sometimes it doesn't. Right now it doesn't, but something people don't do a lot that I sometimes really enjoy is automating the phase. You can get kind of like a weird pitch bendy disperser effect. So that's an interesting way to kind of modulate a sound that I just don't see a lot of people using. A cool way to show off the phase randomization, and also a cool trick on a way to use it to your benefit, is if we turn up the unison and now we have a detuned saw wave. If we turn down the phase randomization, you're gonna hear like this cool lasery effect. It's almost like a flanger. Without phase randomization on, it sounds like this. If we turn up the amount of unison, that's the sound you get. It's like a really cool sound, but only when you want that to sound that way. So to not sound that way, you want the phase randomization. So every single voice is playing at a different phase. And then the voices aren't phase canceling. Now, if we turn legato on, you can hear that cool like flanger sound will just keep going. And it doesn't restart like if we have legato off. But if we right click phase and we click phase legato, then it'll re-trigger. So you also see there's a wrap phase setting in here. Unfortunately, I couldn't find anything about this in the manual. So if anyone knows what the wrap phase is, please comment down below. I'm definitely curious to know what wrap phase does. So next we have this drop down menu here that allows you to change how the phase behaves. Now this is a new thing I've never seen before, and I think it all has to do with the Unison voices. So real quick, Unison creates multiple voices for an oscillator on a single note. So usually when you press a note, it's just one copy of this. But with Unison, you can have multiple copies. So now that's like 16 versions of this stacked on top of each other. But if you want, you can detune it. Let's turn the random back up so it doesn't do that lasery thing. Now you have 16 copies spread across in little increments being detuned against each other. You can change the blend mode to have the yellow one. So in this case, since it's an even number unison, let's change it to an odd number. Just the main one copy is staying up there, and then you can blend in the rest of the copies. So that's kind of like if you just want a subtle amount of extra detuning and fullness, you can change the blend like that. And like I said, if you do odd numbers, then you won't have like any weird phasing. Like if I do 8, now there's like stereo phasing, especially if I start to detune it. Versus if I have it on an odd number, then it doesn't do that. So something to keep in mind. There's more to these settings, but real quick, I want to show you the different phase modes. So when you have all these different voices, these copies of the sound, the phase, when it's on all voices, these settings that you set affect every voice the same. So because the random phase is up, you can kind of hear that how each note sounds a little different and feels a little different in the stereo width. Basically all the voices are using these settings. Now, if we put it on contiguous, new notes continue with the phase of the last note. So I don't really know what that means, but what I think it means is that it just all kind of keeps. So it's kind of like you don't get any settings, you get to just change it so every note just sounds exactly the same. Now this one's really interesting to me. If we turn up the voices, you get to choose where each voice sits on the phase. So it's kind of laid out from left to right, just like how in all voices mode, you get left to right here. So for this, you're basically just setting the phase per voice. So there's no randomization. They just all go wherever you want them to go continuously. So now you're kind of hearing like one voice going to the right and all the others going to the left. And so if you want to get that lasery sound that you get from the random being on 0, if you just put them all on top of each other, you get that phasing now. And so something interesting I want to try real quick is if we have an even number, we can split them all up between 2 stacks. So those are the options for the phase memory menu. Really interesting stuff. Definitely more advanced techniques, especially if you're making like dubstep and stuff like that. You're probably not gonna be using this as much, but like the unison function and adjusting these phases are especially helpful for more melodic synths, breezes, things like that. Not like consistent sounding basses that are all about like making crazy aggressive sounds. So once you start messing with the unison, you have the settings icon here. We didn't get this in Serum 1. This is a really cool new addition. You can basically change the mode, the unison mode. So it's like an algorithm essentially of how the unison works. Linear is like the classic way it always works. Basically, every single voice is spaced evenly. As you can see, look, they're all spaced evenly as we move the detune up and down. It'll always sound really controlled and smooth. Next, we have Super, which is a new mode. It's nice that they illustrate what all of the modes do through the lines. So as you can see here, the edges kind of space out a little more and create more of a stereo detuned effect, while the inner voices are a little bit closer to the center. This one is supposedly better for more lush sounding sounds. I would assume it's called Super because it's supposed to be used in super saws and big giant chords. Personally, I don't notice too much of a difference between those two modes. Honestly, between all of the modes, but I would assume maybe they make more of a difference once you start adding on these extra settings that we're gonna go through. So this mode, apparently called EXP, it's for exponential. Basically, the further that you move the detune knob, there's more space that grows between each voice. So I guess this one's supposed to be really good for more aggressive sounds and sounds that you wanna have more presence in the mix. So that one, I do notice a little bit of a difference. It just feels thicker and a little crunchier. Next, we have a more experimental unison mode called INV for inverted, I believe. And it's called inverted because when you detune it, the voices that are closer to the center are detuned more and the voices furthest from the center are detuned less. So apparently you can create interesting phasing effects and more experimental types of detuning. So this one might be really cool for Reese's. I bet we can hear a really big difference when we turn the randomization down and the detune up and then change it between the modes. Again though, I honestly don't hear too much of a difference. I think these are really subtle nuances for how the unison modes work. I am a little bit disappointed in that because Vital and Phase Plant have unison modes that I feel like have a lot more of an impact. And then finally, we have a random where literally it just randomly places them no matter what you put the detune at. And so that's pretty much like the ultimate experimentation with the unison modes. Next, we've got the unison stacking. Now, this is a really exciting change because Vital has had this for a while. After Vital did it, then Phase Plant added it, and now finally Serum 2 has added stacking modes. Now, again, I will say Phase Plant and Vital both have a little bit extra, more interesting modes for unison stacking. You can use unison stacking for really interesting harmonies and creating chords within one oscillator. If you're coming from like a dubstep background, it's great for things like future rhythm and color bass or making like rave stabs. So without stacking on, all of these voices are all being played at the same pitch. It's all the same note. But if you turn the stacking on, it starts to change the pitch of certain voices and distribute them differently. So this one, 12 one times, is basically going between the center voice, which is the note you're playing, and then some of the other voices are being pitched an octave higher. The 2 times 1, the notes are being pitched 1 to 2 octaves higher. So a combination of both of those. And then the 3 times, it's 1 to 3 octaves higher. So I'll go ahead and play it. And something I should have said earlier, you can go up to 16 unison voices, but the more voices, the more CPU you use. But so you can already see the fucking awesomeness that is unison stacking. Then here, so like as you can see, it's like the 12 is talking about the semitones. So this is 12 plus 7. So that basically means you're building 2 notes out of a triad, which is like a basic chord. So 7 semitones up is a perfect fifth. So you're creating a perfect fifth harmony, 1 octave up inside of this one. And so you'll hear that type of sound in a lot of like house music, a lot of deadmau5 leads, and kind of it gives this nostalgic feel. And so the ×2 ×3 is just adding more octaves. And then you got center 12 and center 24. That means that the center is pitched down an octave here, or pitched down 2 octaves. Let's go higher so you can hear that. And that's really fun to play with, because instead of shifting your oscillator down an octave, especially when you're making like basses and stuff, you can basically get a bass in the center and then like a higher chord-like harmony on top. You can get really creative with the unison stacking. I think it's something definitely worth experimenting with. So next we have some more settings in here of how to control how the unison behaves. So here we can control the width. So the width controls the extent at which the voices, the unison voices, are spread across the stereo spectrum. So if we have 0 width, they're all in mono, which can be a lot cleaner at times, and you can also cause there to be more intentional phasing. That's really cool. And then if you turn it all the way up, really wide, or if you turn it all the way down, then it inverts. So that's what the width does. The range here, the unison range, is basically the range at which everything's detuned. So when you detune, with 0 range, the detune has no effect. 2 range is the default. We could turn it all the way up to 48. That sounds horrible, but you can get creative with it and probably find some cool, interesting ways to use it. Personally, I actually never use the range, and I honestly should more. I always like doing these tutorials because it kind of, in teaching you guys stuff, I discover things that like I forgot or that I overlooked. So that's really cool. The wavetable position, basically all of these affect how each individual voice is related to all the other voices and how they behave. So it's like the wavetable position one, at 0, every single voice is at the same wavetable position. Remember wavetable position, we just went over that. So this is the wavetable position. So if we put the wavetable position mode up, then each voice will be at different wavetable positions. So in this situation with the basic shapes, we can have some of the voices are sine waves, some of them are saw waves. That's why when we have the random down, you don't actually get that phasing effect anymore, because they're not all the same sound. That actually made a really cool sound. I fuck with that. So the wavetable position is kind of giving the range of like how much variation between the wavetable positions the voices are. And then warp 1 and warp 2 do the same thing as the wavetable position, but with the warp knob. So let's say we have the sync on. If we turn this warp 1 all the way to 100, then each voice is going to be at a different level of sync, which can really probably fuck up the sound, because sync kind of adjusts the pitch. So that's how it would sound with no change between the voices. So without that, completely different sounding. So these are just more ways to create interesting harmonies and layering all within one oscillator. So we haven't even started layering other oscillators and stuff like that. So I highly recommend you experiment with these, and I'm sure you'll get insane amounts of variety and versatility messing with the different unison modes, stacks, and the different ways to kind of warp the voices. So next over here, we have the ability to pan. Left to right. We can also adjust the level of the oscillator. Something I didn't point out earlier, you can right click the oscillator and turn off pitch tracking, which means no matter what note you press, the pitch stays the same, and you could just control the pitch here. Now, there's not a lot of reasons you'd want to use that, at least in this scenario, but just good knowing that it's there. You also have the ability to copy and paste your oscillator to the next oscillator, or even cooler, another cool hidden feature, you have the ability, if you have a bunch of modulations going on, and you want to copy the oscillator over and make a layer, you can copy with mods. And then when you paste, now it pastes the same thing, but includes all the modulations, which is really cool. Sorry, that sounds like garbage. Let's initialize both of the oscillators. So we have one final thing to cover when it comes to the Wavetable Oscillator, and that is the warp mode. So we aren't gonna go through all of the warp modes today, like exactly what all of them do. I will be doing that in a separate video. I'm not gonna go in depth on the warp modes and everything they do. That's gonna be reserved for a separate video focusing just on the warp modes in Serum 2, but we will do a quick overview. So what's really cool about Serum 2 is that now you get 2 warp modes instead of being limited to 1, which is something that was first introduced, I believe, in Vital, because Vital has a spectral warp and a normal warp section, and that was really handy. And now in Serum 2 you get that same ability, except you get all warp modes for both. There's also an ability to swap warps, which I believe means that warp number 1 goes into warp number 2. So when you do warp 2, it's warping whatever happened on warp 1. Let's test it out. So yeah, so we're bending the wavetable, and now we're syncing the wavetable. But I don't know. I honestly don't know why they have swapped warps here, but you have the ability to swap warps. I'm assuming it's how they're affected, but it might not work that way. Anyways, warp modes are cool ways to warp how your wavetable behaves. So there's a wavetable editor, and you can control and edit and create new wavetables. Warp modes are kind of like a temporary way of editing and adjusting your wavetable. It's a great setting to modulate and to use for macros to change the timbres of your sounds and how your sounds behave. So it starts with sync here. Sync is probably one of the most fundamental and handy warp modes, and it's been around since like the start of synthesizers. And it's basically a way of like changing the pitch without changing the fundamental. And down here, if you ever see this is certain warp modes have like an extra setting. So like this is changing like how hard or soft of a sync is happening. The nice thing is in 2D mode, you can visualize how the warp modes are affecting things. So the warp modes that are exclusive to the Wavetable Oscillator are the alt warps, and they're all old warp modes from Serum 1. So you got bend plus, bend minus, bend plus and minus, pulse width, asymmetrical plus, and then asymmetrical minus, and then you get both. You can flip the wavetable on itself. You can mirror the wavetable on itself. You can remap the wavetable. So basically you can create your own way of warping the wavetable, and then you just basically get like a multiplication of that in the other ones. You can quantize, adjust the odd and even harmonics, and then we start getting into filtering. So you can filter within the wavetable wavetable. That's pretty fucking crazy and really handy. You can also distort within the wavetable. Then we get FMing. FM is a classic. Now, the old Serum FM is the PD, phase distortion, I believe is what it stands for. Yes. And so that's the way that they were doing FM in Serum 1, was phase distortion. Now they have classic FM. So the same type of FM that's used in, for instance, Operator, FM8, Citrus. This is like now allowing you to do classic sounding FM. And you'll notice it sounds quite different and it behaves differently too. So definitely whenever you want to FM something, listen to both versions and how it sounds. The way the FM works is that it gives you the option to choose the source that you're FMing from. So FMB means that we're FMing from this oscillator. So this oscillator is getting sent into oscillator A to be frequency modulated. So this oscillator will be frequency modulated by oscillator B. And that creates a really interesting sound. And so when you're using the classic FM, that's actually just called FM, that's a good time to change the pitch mode to ratio. And that's cool because we actually just made it phase and have its own movement. So FMing is a really interesting, creative way to create new sorts of timbres and sounds. If you're making dubstep or bass music, it's huge. FM is like half the sounds out there are basically built off of FMing two oscillators, usually basic shapes. Usually whatever the source of the FM is, so the modulator, so in this case, oscillator B, you usually want to keep it on a default shape because default shapes, the basic shapes, are the cleanest wavetables out there. So there's not a lot going on. It's just one consistent sound, which creates a cleaner FM. So if we were to use something like one of these spectral tables, it's really noisy. Actually, not a good example. This actually works really well. Okay, this one. All right, maybe it's more of a issue with the phase distortion. So here, I'll put it on phase distortion because actually these sorts of things do seem to work pretty decent with FM, the classic FM, but with the phase distortion type of FM, it just, things can get really noisy and messy. Definitely FM is one of those things, it takes years of experimenting to really kind of understand how it works. It's always, there's like these little sweet spots and it just, you start to learn what sounds work best together and what they create. So it's like FMing from sine waves are a very specific sound that you will become really recognizable versus FMing from saw waves. So definitely start out with default shapes so you can just understand some of the basic sounds you can create from FMing. Also, the FM section has different algorithms. So there's a through zero mode, exponential mode, and linear mode. Like I said, I'll go in depth into all that later. So you get the phase distortion, the classic Serum 1 FM. Then you get AM, and AM is amplitude modulation. That's a different type of FM. I don't really use it that much, but like I said, in the warp mode video, I'll go in depth on what all that means. And then you also have ring modulation. So if you've heard of a ring mod, this is basically using the other oscillator to modulate oscillator A in the same way that a ring mod, for instance, if you get like kilohertz ring mod, you'll see how they have like the sine wave mode. The way ring mods usually work is when you put a ring mod on something, the ring mod is usually using some sort of waveform to modulate the sound, in a lot of cases a sine wave. So this essentially lets you create your own styles of ring mod by using another oscillator or source to ring modulate it. And as you'll see in all of these, the FM section and the AM, RM, all that, you can also FM from the filters, which is crazy. And again, we'll get into all that later. But hey, that is pretty much everything you need to know about how the Wavetable Oscillator works and functions, all the little hidden features. I tried to include some tips and technique ideas in there to just give you a starting point of how to experiment with it. But yeah, I hope that was a really helpful tutorial for you, really comprehensive, and gave you everything you needed to know, all the details about how to use the Wavetable Oscillator. I originally intended to go over all of the oscillators in this video, and I didn't realize just how long of a video that would be. So These will all be broken up, covering each oscillator, and then I'll put them together in one giant supercut. But if you enjoyed this tutorial, give the video a like, please, subscribe. Feel free to ask any questions down in the comments and I'll answer as best as I can. And if you have friends who are sound designers and are trying to learn Serum 2, send them this video, send them my videos. That stuff really helps. Word of mouth, all of that. I'm putting a lot of effort into making these tutorials, and so the more people I can help with them, the better. So with that, my name's Qbik. I will see you guys in another boring ass but also interesting video about Serum 2 very soon. So keep it locked, keep being yourself, and goodbye.